Sure, I can start us. So Jacob Lee, Scent Hound franchisee. I won't give the full story, but started my career as a mechanical engineer in the nuclear power field and quickly realized that wasn't a long-term career path for me, but it was a great place to learn and good for the resume for applying to business school. So applied to business school, went to University of Virginia for my MBA, and then did the typical post-MBA consulting path. So I applied for all the firms, did the summer internship at Boston Consulting Group, and then worked full-time with BCG for 3 years. And that's where I met Keegan. We were on a case together, spent months locked away in a tiny conference room with no windows. But that time was kind of percolating this idea for search fund or entrepreneurship, and so left in 2021, quit BCG and pursued a self-funded search with a friend from business school for a few months. I convinced him to leave his New York investment banking job, move back to Birmingham, and start a search. So we really didn't kick a full search. We kind of started to search and then quickly pivoted to franchising. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but I'll leave it there.
Awesome. And I'm Keegan McBride. Now I'm the co-founder and CEO of SBA Source, but as Jacob said, we used to work together at BCG. So I kicked off my career at BCG in Atlanta. I worked there for 4 years, and then I moved on to an investment firm where I worked for a couple years. And then, this idea for SBA Source came about. I had early before BCG, I started and launched a coffee shop in my college town, and so I kind of wanted to get back into that. And SBA Source gave me the opportunity to work with small business owners, and that's what we're doing now.
Awesome. So Jacob, I guess we'll come back to that moment where you started the search and you transitioned to franchising. So now you have even more perspective with how, the search space has evolved, your franchising experience. So for the audience, that's probably the most potent questions, why did you pick the franchise path? And how do you think of it now, that many years down the road?
Sure. I think hindsight's 2020. At the time, putting myself in my shoes back then, I don't think we were that strategic necessarily in picking franchising. But the way it sort of played out was we left our jobs, I moved back, or I was in Birmingham. My partner was in New York. We started having conversations with anybody in town that we could meet with, and we wanted to do a geographic focused search. And so we met with business owners, investment bankers, accountants, attorneys, kind of expressing the idea. And the feedback that we got was fairly pessimistic. It was I'm not really sure you're gonna be able to convince someone to sell you your business to an investment banker and a consultant with no management experience, and those things don't mean anything to most business sellers. And then the other thing was we met with a Darden graduate who was probably 3 years ahead of us that had been searching for 2 years and had probably better network than we did and the same resume that we did, and had been searching and had not executed a deal. And so that was in the back of our head. And then simultaneously, a few different people turned us on to this world of franchising. And I think I had always, in business school, I never heard anyone talk about franchise ever. And I didn't know anyone who had any success in franchising. And so in my head, it was, QSR McDonald's, and then the non-QSR franchises were, middle manager that want to be their own boss. And I was like, it must not really be an opportunity. So I'd kind of had this stigma against franchising. But I think Orange Theory Fitness was the first business that I had heard about, and someone I knew had an opportunity to make a direct investment in a franchisee, and I kind of got a peek behind the curtain on that deal and was pretty shocked at how successful. Like at the time, I think you could build an Orange Theory for 2 times EBITDA. So it was like a $400,000 investment and $200,000 run rate EBITDA. And so this idea of, low entry multiple, so to speak, and then being able to start small, self-fund, use SBA debt, build a store, and then kind of reinvest at a high rate of return and find a geography that has similar demographics to the successful store, and then just kind of replicate the model. That was the original, I guess, idea that got us excited. So yeah.
Cool. And to drill down like a little bit more on this, right? So like searchers, yes, in general, franchising is like a small part. And then, okay, like some people have heard of franchises and they're like, okay, let me buy an existing franchise, right? So there's always the buy versus build argument, even like with franchises. So, and like a lot of people find de novo like franchises kind of risky. Like you don't know what the cash flow is going to be. Like versus when you buy even, a franchise unit, you kind of like have this idea. So as you were building your portfolio, how did you like become comfortable with this risk, and how should people think of it?
Sure. Yeah. So like rewinding back in 2021, I don't think I had that sophisticated of a like framework for how to think about buy versus build versus de novo. It was more like, okay, the alternative is a traditional search fund deal, like buy a landscape business with $1 million of EBITDA for 4 times EBITDA, use a loan, and hopefully grow the business and pay down debt and like create value that way. So that was kind of like the original thesis. And then this franchise alternative was, okay, if we wanted to build a business, and at the time, my partner and I were both full-time in the business. If we wanted to build a business that was big enough to sustain us, then it needed to probably be like $1.5 million in EBITDA. So backing into like how many units would that be, and then like what franchises are out there that have available territories that would support that many units, and then I guess the couple of opportunities that we looked at to like buy, we didn't really think that we had the ability to go and buy an existing franchisee. That wasn't like a path that we really considered, and I just don't think we had heard of it. And I think in hindsight, buying an existing franchisee as a starting point is probably a great place, because the first few units going from 0 to 5 is pretty tough. And so I think if you can buy an existing business and have that head start, probably save you a couple of years of pain. And so I don't think I guess long story short, we probably weren't that strategic on de novo versus buy and build. It was really just, okay, this is the opportunity. It fits the size that we want. And I guess most importantly, it allowed us to get into an industry that we were excited about, which is dog services, that had some tailwinds. And so there's a lot of other reasons that we like Scenthound, but that was part of the thought process.
Cool. So if you tell us about how you arrived at that like dog services like thesis, and how did you like go around finding the brand and like talking to them?
Sure. I think so at the time I had a backyard home office with a big whiteboard, and my partner and I would meet every day for like 3 months and just talk through ideas. And we would use the lists like franchise times and like all these ranking lists, and kind of go through each business and then do as much research we could, pull the FDD. And one of our early filters was like return on invested capital. So We were looking for, and we were pretty biased toward the Orange Theory model, like that $500,000 brick and mortar concept with at least a 25% return on investment. And so that was our initial filter, for better or for worse. And then within there, we got a set of like 100 franchises that fit that rough criteria. And then we would just ask questions about the industry and about the sustainability of the business and the competition, and just some of the like business school type questions you ask about an investment opportunity. And each opportunity had pros and cons. Like we looked at a automotive window tinting business, which was very random. And so we weren't really thesis driven, as in we didn't start with dog services and then go look for opportunities in that industry. We kind of started with like kind of the return on investment criteria and then found different industries. And so like automotive window tinting, it was attractive because it was a very like the stores that we saw were a very, very profitable, very high return on investment. It's very like easy and cheap to get a store up and running. And it's a product that it has been around a long time, and it probably will be around a while. And people like to customize their cars, and so we got excited. I think the things that scared us were like, one, a lot of automotive window tinting businesses apply illegal levels of window tint. Like every state has different allowable, like, you know, what percentage of light can pass through the tint. And so it's not heavily enforced, but it still was like, okay, we don't want to be, again, if a big chunk of your business is like technically not allowed, like that's not what we want to be doing. And so that's just an example, but each of these opportunities had things that we considered. And then I think with Scent Hound, it was just clear that dog ownership over time for decades has been up and to the right, and more household owned dogs, and COVID was a big bump in that. And then the human, like treating your dog as a human, kind of the humanification of dogs is real, and people consider their dog to be a member of the household. And so average spend on your dog has also been on a multi-decade lift. And so like some of the people that I really trust, kind of investors that I really trust, part of their advice was like, really don't underestimate the value of tailwinds and like what that can do long term for your business. And so that was, if I had to boil down Scent Hound to one thing that was the most attractive, that's probably it.
Right. And I think before you mentioned that a lot of franchisors were kind of like skeptical, even with like, you know, searching for more than 3 years. Like you have an impressive resume, but it's still hard to convince these business owners that like, you know, you're credible in the space. So I guess like, did you experience any of this with your partner? How did you guys like overcome it with your like very prestigious like white collar experience, but going into quite a different space?
Yeah, I think we always face that, like still to this day. You know, I don't think that that BCG means anything to most people, and so when we face it, when we started to look for franchises and, you know, apply to become a franchisee of a concept, like they're looking for former franchisees of other concepts that have a proven track record. Particularly, like, let's say we wanted to go buy, you know, 10 Wingstops or something like that. Like, there are certain brands that really have pretty strict criteria on who they allow to become a franchisee, particularly of a big, you know, a multi-unit franchise business. And so I think that was a barrier. I do think there's an advantage, and this kind of gets into the life cycle of a franchise and whether you start an emerging brand or a mature brand. And I think the advantages in an emerging brand are, one, there's more territory available, and so that was like a big part for us. We looked at a more mature chiropractor clinic brand, but they didn't have a bunch of territory available for de novo, and so it would have been finding an existing franchisee to buy, and we wanted to stay in Birmingham, so that made it tough. But also, I think emerging brands are more willing to take who they can get, and so it's probably part of what happened with us. Like early on, franchisors were trying to scale their business fast and get to 100 units, and so probably more willing to work with new franchisees that are across 2 markets that want to take a big territory. So yeah.
I guess just to like double down on that question for the audience. So there are many people that we talk to that they come from a white collar background, and aside from the franchisor being often like, unwilling to trust them, they themselves don't trust themselves. They sort of feel like, if I buy a blue collar business that is already cash flowing, that already has employees, I can tweak it, I can improve it, but can I build it up from scratch? So I guess, do you mind, like, are there some biases, whether it's from franchisor themselves, are there some of those things that you've experienced that it's real? This thing really is harder than I thought, and it is some things that it's more of an illusion and it's not real.
Well, I think what you're hitting on is probably less of a question of what your background is and more a question of what is your disposition. Like, I think I've become more and more convinced that like the entrepreneur bug or gene or whatever you want to call it is a real thing, and that there are people that have this sort of internal get stuff done, like know what to do next, and like can self-direct and like build something. And whether or not you came from blue collar background, white collar background, if you have that, then I think it's a good fit. I think if you don't have that and you thrive in an environment where you know the rules and you fall, and like you have to have a lot of structure, and like you can operate well in structure, then I think entrepreneurship and franchising is hard regardless of your background. And so, but yeah, the bias against white collar, I don't think in franchising it's probably less pronounced, because if you think about it, a lot of franchisors are used to attracting white collar candidates. That's like a bread and butter franchisee. It's like a former white collar that wants to run their own shop. And so, no, I don't think it's that bad. I think it's more of when you get into like mature brands and they can be picky, and they can cherry pick. Like, we only grant licenses to Domino's to like former Domino's employees or something like that, But yeah, I think there's plenty of people with unimpressive backgrounds that have done really well in franchising, and then plenty of people that I've seen that have the most impressive backgrounds that you would on paper think, oh, this is a great fit, and then they don't have it.
So sorry to keep harping on this. So if you had to pick an operator, so there is this entrepreneurial bug / gene, is there anything else, like if you had to like say what it takes to start a great franchise business? Is it just be an entrepreneur kind of thing, or is there more to it? Is there something more specific to this kinds of service businesses?
No, I mean, I think
humility almost. I don't want to put words into your mind.
No, yeah, I think that that it probably depends on the concept to some extent, but like most franchise businesses that I'm thinking of are like, when you think about like the multi-unit retail or QSR or even like service businesses, it's mostly about team building. It's mostly about like you hire the first manager, and then they're hiring their team, and then you're hiring the area manager, and you're kind of, it's so a lot of it is like culture building. And so I think like high EQ, ability to connect with people and build trust and the simple stuff, like just kind of simple leadership stuff. And I think another thing that I've realized is like leadership doesn't have to look a certain way. You know, it doesn't have to be out front, charismatic, inspire the troops type leader. It can look in the way that fits your personality. It's not like you have to have a certain personality, but I do think the people that don't do well are the ones that get in it because they think it's a way to get rich. You know, it's like, I mean, I think obviously looking at it as an investment opportunity is like part of the main driver that I did this. But if that's like top of mind, and if I think people just, you're building a culture, you're building a team, and that will, it will make its way down. And I think the team gets this view of like owner who just cares about profit and doesn't care about the team. If that's what you really believe and value, you know, if that is the sole reason you're in the business. But if you're, I'm kind of rambling now, but if you're like, if you're in it to build a culture and in it to, because you just love like building businesses and you love building stuff, I think that leads to better outcomes.
Okay, cool. So one more question and then I'll sort of, pass that. So going back to kind of like when you were starting this and sort of pivoting more towards, what Keegan is, building out now. So how did you finance this? How did you get the money? Did you use SBA debts?
Sure.
Yeah. You did?
So the first store, so we went and we signed a franchise agreement for 10 units and then added to that later. But we secured the territory and then we went and got an SBA loan for the first store. And it was pretty simple. The first loan, the bank is just looking at your personal financial statement and the FDD basically, and then like the location. So the first store was pretty simple. The second store was kind of lumped in with the first store, like startup franchise. So we used the same bank. And then the third store went out to get an SBA loan with the same bank. I thought, okay, this is gonna be great. I can use the same bank for like my whole development. They already know me. And then they were like, yeah, we really want to see the first two have a couple more years of maturity. And I'm like, well, that doesn't work because I have a franchise development agreement that says I'm going to build like 2 or 3 a year. And so then I went and reached out to a bunch of bankers and like went down the application path with 4 different banks. And if you've ever been through the SBA loan process, it's just, they basically send you an email with a giant checklist of things they need and a bunch of attached PDFs and just say like, good luck. And then it's like a back and forth email for months. And then you get a term sheet. And so I had to slog through that 6 times for each of these stores that we've built. And we just kind of graduated into conventional loan out of SBA. But that was the genesis of SBA Source was, is there a way to make the application process digital and easy and then shop out your application to many banks at once so that you're not having to manually do it the way I was doing it?
So I guess, Keegan, if like I wanted to apply for an SBA loan now using SBA Source, like how long will it take? What will I actually do? Like how will it be different from what Jacob just described?
Yeah. So what we've built and what we're doing here is, to what Jacob's just said, is to make it as streamlined as possible, so that you're able to get your application complete one time while still applying to a handful of different banks. In terms of timeline, the tough bit about SBA financing and SBA financing for franchise is that it really depends on when you get engaged. I think that, and if you were to just go and Google, like, how long does it take to get an SBA loan? The range of outcomes that you see online are so broad that it's basically useless for you as a borrower. The thing is that what for us, we normally are working with folks when, right, like they've signed a franchise agreement, or if they're an existing franchisee that's already been sorted, they might have a location under like identified, but they may or may not have an LOI or a lease signed. And from us, we can then get your application together, and it kind of takes that, getting the application together it can be as quick as you want it to be, right? If you can sit down and you have your documents together, we can knock out an application in a couple of hours, and then we can get term sheets back from banks within a week. But when you're talking about how long it actually takes to get the loan, well, it depends on where you are in the process. Are you ready to have your build out prepared, or are you not? The thing that I always kind of talk to folks about is like no one likes going through the SBA loan process. I don't think you'll find somebody that said that was their most exciting part about starting up their franchise business. But the key is, can you figure out a way that, one, it's a little bit easier, and two, that the financing isn't like the gatepost item that's keeping you from getting open. And so if you're looking at timeline, it might be like 60 to 90 days if everything's prepared and you're ready. But what I always kind of talk about is like, can we get engaged at the right stage so that you're doing this concurrent with finalizing your location, with getting your contractor sorted and things like that, so that those 60 to 90 days are concurrent with what you're already working on, and not actually the driving thing that's pushing your opening timeline.
So to take a step back here, like Jacob was kind of like a good student. It's like, oh, when you apply to college, just like, like have good grades. So when people think of the process, like what should they know about, the qualifications, like basically like looking at their personal financials, like what do banks want to see, and kind of like, what does the SBA loan entail?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for what banks are looking for, to cut it like pretty short and cut and dry, Jacob said they're looking at your personal financial statement and your FDD. Obviously, like they're looking at some other things, like they want to know your credit worthiness. We need to make sure that you're SBA eligible. Your business plan needs to make sense. The projections need to make sense. But the crux of what it does come down to is this a brand that a lender feels comfortable with and that they've already underwritten? There's a huge advantage to being able to connect with a lender that's familiar with the brand, so that they don't have to re-underwrite the franchise itself, and they can kind of just focus on you and your ability to run the business. And then they're looking at your personal financial statement. What that means is your ability to both satisfy the equity injection component of an SBA loan. So for context, an SBA loan will always require some piece of equity injection. The minimum is 10%. A lot of times for startup franchise, your first franchise location, that might be 15 or 20% of project costs. And your pieces of your franchise fee can apply to that. But then they're also ensuring that you have enough what they call post-close liquidity. So the ability to still have some level of cash for your personal expenses, or outside income that can satisfy your personal expenses, such that your personal side is not going to be a worry to the bank for them underwriting the business. Like, can you cover your mortgage and things like that? And so things that people can do to have a stronger application. If you have some people, they already have a high-paying job, but they're looking to transition into something more entrepreneurial, it might make more sense to actually start by keeping your job and running it with a manager that you hire, depending on your situation. Or if you have a spouse that can provide outside income that just from the bank's perspective satisfies the ability for you to cover your personal expenses while you focus on the business, those are things that would be pros.
So can you, like that outside income, it always seemed super frustrating to me. So what if you intend to pay yourself from the business?
Well, that's okay too, right? So, but the key here is being able to piece together an application that tells a complete and realistic story. And so if you're going to pay yourself for the business, that's totally fine. And that can be something that is that you're using to prove that you can cover your personal expenses. But there's two things that we need to consider there. The first is, have you built that into your projections? Because some folks will put together projections for the business, but never have a line item for what they're paying themselves. And then the bank's like, well, you're saying you're going to pay yourself, but I don't see it. So help me understand. That's one. And then two, do you give yourself enough buffer with that post-close liquidity to make it through the ramp-up period? We'd all love to open a franchise that's cash flowing on day one, but the reality is you've got times where you're building out the business and it's not open yet. And there's ways you can get around that and lower your costs with the SBA loans and things like that. But the first couple months probably aren't going to be able to pay you what you want to be able to pay yourself. And so it's all about making sure that you can prove that you're going to be able to make it through that journey so that the bank has confidence in underwriting it. The reality is the banks want to be able to issue these loans, and the backing of the government makes it so that these loans are appealing for the bank. So we just have to make sure that we piece together the application that's both, it's correct, it's appealing, and it's realistic.
So we're starting to get questions from the audience. Please feel free to just submit your question. We'll entertain them at the right time. So I guess, Keegan, if we go through the process, let's say you're just getting one unit. So it seems like you guys work with people once they've signed that agreement. So they paid the franchisee fee that I guess that's coming out of pocket. Let's say it's $35K or something. So I guess if we take an inverted approach, you've worked with applications, why do people get denied who seemingly are in, let's say, good financial standing? The franchise is looks great. Why does it not work?
Yeah. Usually I would say that folks that have, if you're working with the right franchise, even in order to have signed the franchise agreement, you might have had to get some sort of pre-qualification, or you've probably been vetted. It's always a good idea to explore whether or not you'd be able to get an SBA loan before you commit to paying a lot of money for a franchise fee. I would say that the reason that people get denied, kind of outside of us, I would say, is that it's really hard as an individual to determine what the differences are between SBA lenders. If you just go on their websites, they all look the same. And I don't know about you, but before I started doing this line of work and really doing research on it, I couldn't tell you that much about what a different sort of SBA lender would look like. And so the thing is that there's times that I send deals out to lenders and they say, yeah, definitely not something that we'll do. And another lender thinks it's one of the best deals that they've seen. The reality is that different lenders are looking for different things. Primarily, the reasons why somebody might get denied is whether or not they can't basically prove that they have enough of that post-closing liquidity or ability to cover their outside expenses. And one key thing that I think people should think about is, especially when they're planning early on, is exactly what you just said about paying the franchise fee. The way that it typically works is that franchise fee can go towards the equity injection. And so if you are, let's say you paid, I don't know what number you said, 30,000, 35,000 or whatever, towards that can count towards your equity injection, but only the piece that's towards the location that you're opening. And so a place where I've seen some applicants get in a sticky situation is, let's say it was a $30,000 fee per location and they were opening 3 locations and they've just paid 90,000. That 90,000 can't count towards the equity injection for the first location, only the 30,000 can. Now, when they go to open their second location, they can apply 30,000 towards that equity injection. And when they go to the third, they can pay 30,000. And so managing that expectation when you consider your personal financial statement is key. But the main reasons why somebody would be denied, outside of just eligibility reasons, would be just that they don't have the right financial profile.
And
I would also just add to that, because a lot of people are applying for SBA loans for their second or third location, and the bank will be looking at the performance of the original stores. And so they need to know that those stores are self-sufficient or at least on the path of self-sufficiency, and everything's tracking the way it should, in order to feel comfortable for that next loan. Not to say that every store has to be fully at break even before you can get another loan, because that's not like a rule anywhere in the SOP, but just the overall strength of your existing business is a factor for sure in subsequent loans.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I was thinking more here for your first location, but when Jacob's going towards his sixth location, he has to provide financials on all the subsequent locations. And so they're looking and taking all of that into consideration. And so to some extent, the application, if you move towards subsequent locations, can even if you've been through the process, I think Jacob can tell you it's not necessarily getting that much easier, because now at this point, you've actually got a lot more stuff that you have to get together, even if you're familiar with the dynamics. And to Jacob's point, that first lender he went to, that wasn't the right lender to go to for his third one. And so he had to start over and look for a new lender.
And there's just more to explain. You gotta be able to tell the story of every store. I would write this 1-page memo every time I would go for a loan that just is the state of my business and why it's in good shape, and to kind of give the bank a good picture.
Right. So Keegan, a few times you said the eligibility criteria, in passing. So what are those?
Yeah. So broadly, the SBA is built to support US-based businesses that are for-profit and have the ability to cover their loan. There's been a couple changes recently that add a bit more to this. So it's now required that 100% of the business is owned by US citizens, US nationals, or lawful permanent residents. And if somebody is a lawful permanent resident, I would encourage them to look a little bit more into that, because there are green card holders there are some basically green card status that are allowed and some that are not allowed. And so it can just get a little bit hairy. So that's one area. A second would be you can't have any ongoing litigation really. So if you're working, if somebody were, let's say, even just going through a divorce, that can make you ineligible until that's sorted out. And then you need to have a good criminal record, and a clean criminal record, and good credit as well. Those are kind of just baseline questions that if you aren't able to pass through that, you'll probably be filtered out from the get-go. But outside of that, yeah, it's US-based business, small businesses.
Cool. So not to I think maybe I guess good credit. I'm sure I can Google it maybe, but what do you mean? In a credit score, is there a way to give up? I'm sure there's no specific number, but is there some guidance?
Yeah, I top of mind, I'd have to think about what the number. They just changed what the number hard cutoff is. I think it's in the high 600s. But the reality is that I haven't worked with, I don't think, anybody that has a credit score under 700, and so I think. I think you could Google the exact number. I'm not positive, but for the most part, by the time people get to the stage where they've signed franchise agreements and things like that, they've kind of already been vetted out on the credit side.
Cool.
So I will say one plug is I think the SBA program broadly is a great program. The federal program is a great program because it incentivizes banks to lend to small businesses in the case that the business can't get a loan from a conventional loan. And so that's by definition actually part of the criteria is your business cannot get a loan with similar terms from a conventional loan. And so credit worthiness doesn't mean you have to have a big personal balance sheet, because if you had a big personal balance sheet, then you could go get a conventional loan. I think that's the beauty of the program is it enables people without huge resources to go be entrepreneurs and start businesses.
Right. So we had a question from the audience kind of on this topic, what are your thoughts on conventional lending versus SBA? But it looks like, it's already built in, unless you have any other additional thoughts.
Well, I think that there are small business loan products out there that are non-SBA that you could consider alternatives, and some of those might be a good fit. I've not used some of those, but I think generally, if you think about it, if a bank is going to take the risk to lend your small business money and you don't have a big personal balance sheet and you don't have a track record of stable earnings in your business, then it's going to be aggressive terms. Like it's going to be, fully collateralized by any of your personal assets, or it's going to be super high interest rates, or, super short term. So I think it's probably, the analogy is probably like using credit card debt to purchase things. Like there's probably some loan products out there that are conventional for small businesses. Now, when you start to get into sort of mature business, like you've got 5 QSRs and you're looking to open your 6, I think it's a different question, because I think there are banks out there that offer competitive conventional products that you may sort of graduate out of SBA into a conventional loan that is actually a better fit for your business.
Right. And we have another question for you, Jacob. Why open a new business in SBA brokerage instead of focusing on more franchise locations?
Well, you should. That's the same question that my wife asks. Is like, why another business? And I just can't help myself because. But I mean, the answer is that I'm actually not slowing down on ScentHound. Like I'm opening 3 units. Just opened one last week, opening 2 more before the end of the year. So yeah, not slowing down on ScentHound. And this was just like an idea that I couldn't stop thinking about. And then getting Keegan involved, like I think very highly of Keegan, and he's the smartest dude I know. And so the idea of being able to work with him and work on something like this was really exciting. So, but yeah, the answer is no. I'm still all in on ScentHound and opening 3 this year.
Nice.
Cool. So when your wife asks, you blame Keegan, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's Keegan's fault.
So I think Keegan mentioned, when you make your application, you need like a financial model, kind of like where you make your projections. So Jacob, if you tell us a little bit more about like how you did that for ScentHound, kind of like the first time, each time, like how did you, build the model?
Sure. I think generally people are a little bit afraid about the financial projections and the business plan component of the SBA application. But if you ask Keegan, like we've seen a wide gamut of business plans and financial models, and I wouldn't overcomplicate it, would be my advice. Like just like any financial model, it's not reality. It's just meant to like represent, it's meant to test assumptions. So I would say build a model that is a 24-month P&L starting from when you open the business, and then like month by month P&L with the key expenses, and then like a tab that has the assumptions that are in that model, like broken out, the key assumptions. So like if you're a ScentHound, you want to have, assumptions on how fast is my membership going to ramp. And you want to be able to toggle that and see like, what does this mean to my business? And like, if I don't hit the number, if I'm 80% of what I hope to mature to, am I still going to be able to service my debt? So I would say, build a model that has some of the key assumptions baked in, things like labor, things like, product mix, and try and pressure test it. And then when you submit one to the bank, don't try and make it overly rosy or overly pessimistic. Just submit one that you think is realistic, but make sure that you've thought through the assumptions in the model so that if and when the bank asks you about it, you can defend it. And it's not just, I talked to a franchisee during a validation call and he told me to plug this in. I think that's an important part of the process, but just, spend time thinking about it. And then same with the business plan. I think it doesn't have to be like a novel. I think if it's just thoughtful and and it shows that you've spent time doing research on your market, on your business, on the competition, then that's really just what the bank is looking for.
So we got another question from the audience for Jacob. How's your time split between SendHound and SBA Source? How many hours are you spending working in SendHound at this point? And if you refresh our memory on how many have opened and how many you still have, you said 3?
Sure. So we have 6 open as of last week and 8 by the end of the year, and we have 20 in our development agreement. And I still spend 80% of my time on SendHound, and SBA Source is ramping up, and so I'm really fortunate in SendHound to have our organizational structure is we have area manager in Birmingham overseeing the 4 stores, area manager in Nashville overseeing the Franklin store, now East Nashville, and then probably 6 or 8 in that market that she'll oversee. And so that they're handling a lot of the hiring and firing and helping get the stores open. We also have a development manager that is managing some of the build out from lease sign to store open, build out, ordering equipment, all that. So I'm really excited about the team that we have in SendHound, which has enabled me to focus on a little bit more on SBA Source, but also just kind of on operational improvement efforts within our SendHound business.
But you said earlier you had a partner at least when you started.
Yes. So I had a partner when I started, and we were both full-time in the business, and we opened our first store. It was going well, and then we kind of realized we don't need this. One, we realized this is going to take a while to ramp. The going from zero to meaningful business, scaled business is not a 1 year, 2 year journey. It's like a 4 year, 5 year journey, and in the meantime, it's not going to support 2 people like us with young families. And so and then 2, I think at that stage of the business, 2 Darden MBAs, finance and consulting, that's not what the business needed, and so it really just needed one of those people. And so so we were able to he's still my partner. We were able to rework our arrangement and everything, but he went and got a full-time job, and so I stayed on as full-time in SendHound.
Okay, so do you mind talking a little bit more about initially how did you structure the partnership? So how did you how did you? I don't know if you can. It might be but anything you can disclose for other people. I think many people here are going to have partners. Things might or might not turn out how they intend. So how do you do that?
Sure. Yeah. So we started the partnership 50-50. And I think that you'll hear all kinds of advice when talking about partnerships on what the best way to do it is. And I still don't know that I have a firm, right way to do things. But yeah, I do think it's important to think about, think critically about, and I think we were really fortunate in that most of the time when people start 50-50 and then they change direction, it's a bad thing, and you end up not being friends. But I was literally talking with him 2 minutes before this call about another thing that he's involved in, and we talk all the time, and so we've maintained a great relationship. But I do think in hindsight, when we started in SendHound, thinking really critically about what our roles are going to be and being realistic about those. And it's hard before you've gotten into it to know what the business is going to need. And so some of that stuff you can't sort out in advance. But yeah, I think, keys to a successful partnership are having those conversations about what your roles are going to be, and being willing to have the tough conversations when there's something that you feel is off, or that it is very analogous to a marriage. I think communication is key, and I think that and so in our case, working through this change like we like approached it like, look, I don't think this is going to be sustainable. And so then it was just this process of like, okay, how do we get to a solution that works for both of us and that we're both equally, somewhat happy with. So
how does that affect the SPA? Like, Keegan, so will your partner, like, can you say, okay, I no longer want to have a personal guarantee? Is that?
So if you have an equity or an economic ownership in the business greater than 20%, then you have to sign a personal guarantee. So even if you're not, involved in the business, if you own more than 20%, then you sign a personal guarantee. And then same with like, a lot of these franchise businesses are you're signing leases, and most leases will require a personal guarantee, like retail leases, until you get to sufficient scale that landlord sees the corporate guarantee as being sufficient. So we've been able to transition to signing more corporate guarantees as the business gets more mature.
Yeah, and so I think to Jacob's point there, I think doing something like this with a partner, if you find the right partners, can be great. I mean, I think that he described a situation where they were working together when they were figuring out what they were going to do and things like that. But the reality is also, like, there's a big caveat there, which is if you find the right person, and make sure that person is somebody that you feel like that you can work with through good times and through tough times. Like, even for Jacob and I think one of the things that was really nice is, like, when we were working together, it was one of the toughest work environments I've been in that it was really stressful. We didn't always see eye to eye on everything. And we knew that even going through that, we could work through it. And that made it a lot easier for us to be able to have a partnership now. We don't have a personal guarantee on our partnership, right? And so even with that, it's like it felt sufficient. And so it's just maybe considering that if that person is the right person, if things do get tough.
Okay. But will the SBA, will the banker like investigate like the partners, like the dynamic between them, or not really?
I mean, I think to some extent, like if you're deciding to go into business together, they're assuming to some extent that you're gonna be able to work through some of these things. So they're not gonna, sit down and decide whether or not Jacob and his business partner are compatible enough that maybe they could have been married. As Jacob says, it's as important as a marriage. But they are underwriting both of you. And so, it's worth having, like, in your business plan and things like that, what are the roles that each of y'all are going to play and things like that.
And I do like, another point is that the reason the bank is doing all of this for an SBA loan, part of it is, their underwriting and trying to understand the creditworthiness of the business, i.e., how likely are you to pay back the loan? But the other part is just to comply. The SOP has a lot of guidelines and rules that the bank needs to follow in order for their insurance to be valid in the event of default. So, like, if the borrower fails to pay back the bank is going to go to the SBA to try and get paid. And if they didn't follow the right procedures, then the SBA won't fulfill that obligation. So the banks are not really looking for gotchas. They're more just like making sure their T's are crossed and their I's dotted, so that in the event of default, that they are still covered.
Yeah, and in the event of default, do they like fully execute against their personal guarantee? Like, is it like, will they, like, how far will it go? Just God forbid, like somebody can't pay the loan.
I think, we've not had personal experience with that, but I think that what I've heard is that it depends on the lender. Like, I think there's a whole process for working these things out. And so, I don't think it automatically means bank comes for a judgment on your house, boom. But I think it's a long, painful bankruptcy process with court involved, and so it's not a very good answer. But I think that personal guarantee is different from having a lien on your house, which is, which at times these loans, if it's larger than $350,000, the bank has to put a lien on your personal assets where available. And so that's different than a personal guarantee. But yeah, I'm not an expert in that matter, but my understanding is that that it's a long process and it doesn't automatically mean, you lose your house.
And kind of like final question coming full circle. So you've opened a few units now. Like, what's the path to profitability, and how long does it take? Like, what does it kind of like cost you? And then if you were to sell them, what multiples would that be in?
Sure. So I think it's a kind of loaded question. I think that like in ScentHound, you have the store level economics and like store level EBITDA. And so that is about, in our business, selling memberships and ramping up your membership count until for us, it's about 400 members that you break even. And then I'd say 600 is kind of mature. 800 and above is great. And so you have the store level economics. And then as I've built a store and ramped it up, I started earning cash flow off that store. Like, I've kind of reinvested in the P&L by building out the back office, so to speak. So we have now area manager, started with like area manager in Birmingham, and then area manager in Nashville. And then now we have 5 people in a call center that handle all the inbound and sales. And we have bookkeeper, so like that starts to become sort of the corporate overhead. And then eventually like that corporate overhead like can support 20 stores. And so that's when the consolidated earnings, and in my mind, that's when it starts to become sort of a real scale business, is when you're able to not only have your stores performing, but you're able to cover your corporate overhead and then start to earn on a consolidated basis. And it's kind of a standalone business, not a collection of stores.
Got it.
And then the other question was on multiples. I think generally in the franchise world, franchise businesses would trade for less than equivalent non-franchise businesses generally, because you're under the contract of a franchise agreement. So I think, generally it's like sub 4 times EBITDA. But there's obviously examples of exceptions. Like I think in the heyday of Orange Theory Fitness had a lot of private equity consolidators, and that drove valuations way up. And so I think when private equity gets involved at the franchisee level, it creates a marketplace and drives up valuations. But I think that's one of the beauties of franchising versus of search fund, is you can find a sizable franchisee and buy the business for a really fair valuation, that the math all makes sense with an SBA loan. And then you also have like this path for inorganic growth by buying out other franchisees that again trade at, sub 4 times EBITDA. And so the whole like private equity roll up playbook that was executed back in the day, like I think the opportunity kind of still exists within franchising because these are like sub-institutional, and so it's really hard for these markets to drive valuations way up. But yeah, I think the opportunity is good.